I'm now excited to introduce Keith Perry of Hudson Valley Drones. Keith is Scanifly's official hardware partner. For any of our customers on the call or anyone, any solar companies out there, if you have questions on hardware, Keith's our guy. We're happy to make an introduction. Keith Perry is the owner and lead drone operator of Hudson Valley Drones. While operating in the UAV space for nearly half a decade, he's built and maintained a successful drone services company in upstate New York. Prior to his emergence in the UAV market, he pursued and operated successful ventures in HVAC and in the insurance industry. In addition to holding a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from John Jay College, Keith is also a Part 107 certificate holder and a certified level 1 SCOAS thermographer through FLIR's ITC. So if there are any thermal questions, we'll direct those over to Keith, and perhaps David has some answers as well. He has extensive experience operating the Inspire 2 and the Matrice 210 platforms with both RGB and thermal sensors, and is proficient in precision mapping using ground control points and data processing and drone deployment Pix4D. I'm going to turn it over to Keith, who is going to walk you through hardware considerations and many other things.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, everyone. As Jason said, my name is Keith Perry. I'm the owner and lead drone operator at Hudson Valley Drones. It's nice to meet you all. We partner with Scanifly to help place their customers, help them determine what is the best hardware option and then place them or procure that hardware option. It's important to recognize that we all have different workflows, and while we may be using our drones, with Scanifly's platform, our needs may change based on what exactly or what else we do with the drone. Today, we're going to talk about those considerations that an individual or an organization might want to take into account when you're selecting a drone. And we're also going to discuss what you should do if you have the unfortunate experience of crashing your drone into a tree. So before we go into more detail, I think it's important to remember that your drone is a tool, right? It's a tool to help you in the survey process, just like your tape measure is a tool to help you measure, right? Similar to the way in which you wouldn't walk into Home Depot, buy a saw, and call yourself a carpenter. Just buying a drone won't necessarily yield the best results as far as a survey, right? It's important to make sure you have the right equipment and that you've practiced with the equipment and that you've become familiar with the equipment after purchasing it. So we're going to break down the hardware considerations into 4 categories: flight platform, camera quality, obstacle avoidance, and remote controller capabilities. Today, we're going to focus mostly on DJI product offerings, but it's important to recognize that there are other options out there, and there are other considerations other than these 4, but we've narrowed them down to these because I think they're the most important. So the first thing we're going to touch on is flight platform. The flight platform refers to the app or the software that you're going to use when you conduct your flight operations. Often people don't take this into account when they're selecting their drone for purchase, and I think it's important to take it into account before purchasing your drone, because if you plan on using Pix4D but you purchase a Mavic Mini, they're not going to be compatible, and you've just wasted $500 or more. So we want to make sure you're making the right decision in the first place and being as efficient as possible with your purchases. All drones offer a native flight platform, whether it's DJI Go or DJI Go 4, or more recently DJI Fly. And these platforms are used for manual flight and also for assisted features like the point of interest mode, like David talked about before. But there's other apps out there like Drone Deploy, Pix4D, Ground Station Pro, Litchi, that can be used for other autonomous flight plans. Each have their own niche, so it's important to research them beforehand and determine which one would be a best fit for your workflow. The next consideration after the flight platform is the camera quality on the drone. Some drones, the Inspire platform, the Matrice 210 platforms, have modular payloads, so where you can switch your camera depending on the application. The prosumer and consumer models, the Phantom series, the Mavic series, and the Air offer a camera that's not modular, so it's important that you make the right decision in the first place. Resolution is one of the most important factors. We typically don't recommend a sensor less than 12 megapixels, but that tends to be the industry standard nowadays. So if you're using a relatively modern platform, it's not typically a factor. Another important factor is the type of shutter on your camera. A mechanical shutter can often produce a more crisp and accurate image versus an electronic shutter. But in certain applications, it doesn't necessarily make a difference. So again, that's important to discuss and explore as far as what's right for you and your organization. Other considerations are your field of view, which is the angle at which, how wide of an angle you can see with the camera, and dynamic range, which is defined as the range of colors that you can see under a set condition. So obstacle avoidance is another hot feature, and it's been showing up quite frequently. Most drones now, I would say almost all drones now, have obstacle avoidance and obstacle detection to some degree. Obstacle avoidance allows for the detection and or avoidance of obstacles using visual, infrared, and other kind of sensors mounted on the drone. Here's an example of the Mavic 2 Pro specifically. It's got 6 degrees of obstacle detection. You'll see on the front, on the rear, both sides, the bottom, and the top. That's super beneficial, especially when you're operating in point of interest mode around trees, because it can help you with your situational awareness. As David said before, right, nothing beats visual line of sight, but obstacle avoidance and obstacle detection can be a tool to assist in not getting your drone stuck in a tree. It's important to be aware of the type of obstacle avoidance your platform has and the way that it operates. As we saw on the last slide, the Mavic 2 Pro has a 6-direction obstacle detection, which means an obstacle from nearly any angle will be detected. The same goes for the Phantom 4 series, with the exception of some top-mounted or obstacles that might be coming from the top. But if you compare that to something like the Mavic Pro, specifically in this image, right, you can see the lateral sensors on the Mavic 2, which is on the left, but they don't have it on the right. So if you're operating in point of interest mode and you don't have that detection and that assistance, you can find yourself parked in a tree quite quickly. So the last consideration we're going to talk about here is your remote control. Typically, DJI platforms come with 2 options: a standard remote controller and a smart remote controller. The standard remote controller relies on a third-party screen to be used, whether that's your iPhone or your iPad or a DJI display. It's beneficial because it comes at a lower upfront cost and it's compatible with most devices. It is also beneficial because you can use third-party apps on a standard remote. One drawback is that it's notoriously difficult to use an Apple device or even an Android device in a really bright sunlight situation. So that can cause another challenge when operating your drone. Now, the smart remote is a more recent addition to DJI's product lineup. It features a built-in display, which is super bright. It comes at a large upfront cost, but it's unparalleled in viewability on a bright day. A disadvantage is that it lacks most compatibility with third-party apps. So generally speaking, you're stuck with the proprietary DJI flight platforms. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, depending on what you're going to be using it for, but it's worth exploring before making that decision. So I know David touched on this before, but I think it's important to touch on some helpful accessories and other things that we might recommend with your purchase to get the most out of it. The first and most important addition, in my opinion, is going to be additional batteries. With any drone, 25 minutes or so is going to be your max flight time, even less depending on the conditions. So it's important to, and we recommend having at least 3 batteries total. That gives you the opportunity to go to more than one job site any given day, or to allow you to redo a flight if something's gone wrong. It prevents you from rushing when you're flying and gives you the time to not make mistakes. A close second to the batteries would be a hard-sided carrying case. I'm also a big believer in that. It serves 2 purposes. First of all, it protects your investment. If you've just spent $2,000 on a drone, you want to make sure that you want to make sure you don't crash into a tree, but you definitely want to make sure it's not bouncing around in your trunk and getting beat up. But more importantly, I'm kind of a believer that perception is everything. If you show up to a client's house with a soft-sided case or your drone in its cardboard box, they're gonna immediately be like, what's going on here? What is this? This person's obviously not experienced. So it says a lot to show up in it with a hard-sided case, with everything neatly packed in and protected. And I think it's a good image for you and your company ultimately. Other accessories I'd recommend would be a car charger, spare propellers, a charging hub for multiple batteries, propeller guards, spare SD cards, Those are all great features. I can't reiterate enough what David said. Use a different SD card for each flight, because if you crash or something goes wrong, at least you'll be able to salvage the data from the last flight. So now we're going to talk about what happens if you crash your drone. It happens. I've gotten my drone stuck in a tree. I'll admit it. It's a really frustrating experience and creates super high anxiety, but it's important to, manage it and deal with it as effectively as possible. The first thing you do is turn off the drone, turn off the propellers. I've seen people in like a panic try to grab the drone and try to pick it. It's just, that's a terrible idea. You can hurt yourself. After turning off the drone, you're going to evaluate the crash site for any damage that might have been caused by the drone, tree branches, power lines, right? A shingle on the roof, anything like that. Just make sure it's not a dangerous situation. Retrieve the drone, remove the battery, put it back in your case, try to collect everything that you can. Evaluate the damage. So then take a look at your drone, right? Are the damages superficial, or are there just some scuffs in the body, or is there really some serious issues? And then finally, you're going to want to document the damage, take photos of the drone, the crash area. If you cause damage to something else, that's going to be important to provide to your insurance company, but also to fill out an accident report if that's something that your company requires as part of their workflow. Now, being stuck in a tree isn't as bad as crashing, I would say, but it's still a really frustrating situation, and probably more common than crashing. So like the first and most important thing to do is locate the drone. If you're following the rules and you're flying within line of sight, it shouldn't be too far from you. So you should be able to locate it pretty easily. But if you've got a flyaway situation and for some reason you can't locate it, spend the time to find it. The drone should still be flashing because there's probably going to still be some battery life in there, so that can be helpful. But find the drone and then mark the location somehow, whether that's dropping a pin on your Google Maps app or taking down and wherever it is, somehow document that location. Make sure there's not a risk of the drone falling out of a tree and hitting someone. Take the time to secure below it. Use cones, use caution tape. If you don't have that, have someone stand below it. I mean, if it's in the middle of the woods and there's no chance that it falls on anyone, that's one thing. But, the only thing that's worse than getting your drone stuck in a tree is having it fall and hit someone. Like, that would be terrible. If you feel like you can safely retrieve it, give it a try. I've seen people use poles. I've seen people climb trees. Personally, I'm not a tree climber, and I wouldn't risk you getting hurt by doing it. If you can't get it on your own, contact a tree service, whether it's a tree climber or an arborist. A lot of times they'll be able to climb the tree, or if they can't climb it, they can go up in a bucket truck. It might cost a couple $100, but it's good to retrieve the drone, get it down, and get it back, and hopefully in pretty good shape. So once you've been able to retrieve the drone, you're going to want to inspect it for damage. Remove the propellers, take them in your hands, check to make sure they're not cracked, bend them a little bit, make sure they're still structurally sound. If there's any scuffs or anything like that, you can replace them. It's a really inexpensive preventative fix. Spin the motors, make sure there's nothing grinding in them, check the arms, the camera, the landing gear, the battery, the lights, check everything for damage, make sure there's nothing that's going on with it. If all seems good, test the drone in a controlled location. Don't crash the drone at someone's house and then leave, don't crash the drone at someone's house and then try to fire it up and fly it right there. If there's something wrong with it, it might crash again. And the only thing worse than crashing is crashing again in front of a client. It's a really bad look. Test all the features, simulate a site visit, even give yourself some time to cool down. And if there's any visible damage, contact DJI or a local repair shop and get it fixed by a professional. A few notes on repair shops. Generally, I'm a believer in sending it back to DJI or an authorized repair shop, but sometimes that can be a challenge. Sometimes there's a lag when it comes to DJI. Sometimes they're backlogged. I know with the whole COVID crisis, they were shut down for a while. Sometimes there can be a language barrier. They're a Chinese company, so sometimes dealing with tech support can be a little bit of a challenge. But if you can, send it back to DJI. If you can't, you have a local repair shop, go to them too. But ultimately, what I encourage people to do is do what you feel most comfortable with. It's a stressful situation. And if you can find someone good that you like to work with, capitalize on that and work with them. So as we wrap up this section, there's just a few points that I want to reiterate. Find the balance between features and cost on your aircraft. Sometimes you can have it all and sometimes you can't, and that's okay. There's always room to improve in the future and make an investment. The cheaper option isn't always the cheaper option. To spend less as far as an upfront cost might be great as far as the short term, but your deliverables might suffer long term. And we're here if you have any questions. We've made a lot of mistakes and learned over time. And, if you can learn from us and we can shed some light on the questions that you have, we're happy to do that. Thank you.